Ever got to your bass and thought, my fingers are way too small, I've got no idea how to get around my bass, there's no way I can play this thing, my fingers are way too small? Well, then I've got something for you. So let's get into some tips on how we might solve that. Now, the first one is just bad hand position on the neck. Having a bad or poor or just cramped hand position on the neck can lead you to think my fingers are too small. And if you get a better hand position on your fingerboard, that can do quite a lot to improve that. So if you take your hand off the bass, just hold it out and make sure your fingers are loose and relaxed. We do want a relaxed hand. A tense hand is a hand which is not going to play as efficiently as it can over the fretboard, and it's a hand which is going to tighten up and not do what we want it to do. So wiggle your fingers round and get your fingers feeling all nice and loose, and then sort of arch your hands in, make this sort of C shape here, and just hold it out in front of you. Don't arch your thumb quite as much. We do want your thumb to be pretty much like that. It needs to be pretty flat, but curve your fingers slightly. The reason why we do this is obviously so you're not touching the strings below it. Unless you want to, then you can mute the strings that way, but we're not getting into that. It's so you've got a little bit more rigidity into your fingers, because an arch is a stronger shape, and if it's a stronger shape, you know, it just applies the force needed and doesn't tense your hands out too much. The arch is a stronger shape, you can sort of hold it better, it holds better finger position, but you want your thumb pretty flat on the back of the fingerboard. But hold it out in front of you, arch your fingers slightly, and just put it on the fingerboard and just see where your fingers naturally rest. Don't do where you naturally go on the fingerboard originally. Do this, take it out, and then put it on the fingerboard. You should be able to get a 3 fret span pretty easily, going from 1st fret on the E to 3rd fret on the E. So 1st fret to 3rd fret on any string, you should be able to pretty easily get that from your 1st finger to your pinky. And if you can do that, then you've got pretty good bass hand technique. If you feel like that's not a stretch for you, then you're on the right track. If that does feel like a stretch for you, then try and figure out why. Is it something to do with your wrist position, your hand position, your arm position? Is it all tensed up like this? Or is it just, you know, have a look, have some diagnosis and try and see what's going wrong and try and solve that. If you can do it, if you can spread your hand out enough without tensing it, just hold your hand on the back of the fretboard or just on the front, not even with your thumb. If you can stretch that far without even feeling the stretch, then it's something in your hand position. So check that, and if you can do that but you can't do that, then you might want to give that a little bit of a check out. Otherwise, if you can do that, you've got good hand position. The next thing is use your pinky. If you are not using your pinky and you're just using 1, 2, 3, you often get stuck, especially around the lower reaches of the bass, and if you need to stretch a little bit more. These 2 fingers are the furthest apart that you'll need. If you take your pinky away and then only have this one out, then you've got less reach essentially. So if you're not using your pinky, then you're not going to get as much reach. And this does sound pretty obvious, but I see people say their hands are too small and they're not using their pinky, and that is a crucial error, because you can extend the reach of your hand by using the 2 fingers that are furthest away from each other. You can get more stretch. I can get way less stretch at my 3rd finger than my pinky, and it feels way less like a stretch. So using your pinky as soon as possible is a great way to, you know, improve your stretching ability. If you're not using your pinky, please do. Now, higher up the range, I wouldn't use my pinky, I'd just use my 1st, 2nd and 3rd, but all the notes are so close together, you'd have to have basically a 1-fingered hand essentially to not be able to do all of those notes. So please do use your pinky. Not enough people do, and you know, it is a crucial part of bass playing. But there is one more thing which I can mention, which if you do just have unusually small hands, or you do still feel like your hands are too small and you can't do that, then you can do something which is called micro shifting. If you just take a shape or a riff, you don't essentially need to stretch to that whole shape. You can make little shifts and little adjustments. Loads of the great players do it. And if you shift around your fingerboard, just to make it easier, if you can shift quickly, they're called micro shifts because they're small distances. They're not like, oh, changing positions a lot all over the fingerboard. they'll be very slight, a bit like this, just up and down the fretboard. You can make these little micro shifts over the fretboard, and lines can become a lot easier for you, as maybe a 2 to 6 fret stretch is perhaps a little bit difficult, but you can just go from the 2nd fret, this B here, you can, instead of having to go that, you can do a little micro shift like that, and you know, that can make it a lot easier for a lot of people. Now, I've got massively large hands and I do not suffer with this issue, so micro shifting isn't something which I do. But if your hands are small, because you know, some people's hands are small, now I've got giant monster hands, but that's besides the point, micro shifting is a great option for getting around the fretboard way easier than it otherwise could be. So if you don't know, or you don't already do micro shifting, then start if you feel like your hands are too small, and if you feel like eventually you grow out of it and your bass hand technique develops, then you can stop using it. But if you do need to use it at the moment, it is a perfectly valid and fine technique for playing bass. We do want to make bass ultimately accessible for anyone who wants to play it, and if you've got small hands and that is how things become easier for you, then do it. But if you can just not shift, it is sort of the quote better solution because it requires a little bit less energy, but there is nothing wrong, and don't ever let anyone tell you that it's wrong to do any sort of micro shifting. It is a totally valid technique used by some of the great bass players which have small hands, and if you have small hands, then you're probably going to want to use it as it is a useful one, and don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. Some people may be like, they've got really big hands, just like, oh, just use your hands and, you know, stretch them a bit more. But people that have big hands don't really understand what it's like for people who have small hands. Personally, I don't suffer with any of those issues, and I can do a 2nd fret to 6th fret stretch easily. But I don't want you to get down on that if you've got smaller hands or worse fretting technique in the beginning stages. But if you've been playing bass for a while now and you can't do that, then there's no problems with it at all. Use that micro shifting and find a way where it works for you, because ultimately you are controlling the way you play bass, and if you find a thing that works, then use it. Ever looked at people who practice for hours and hours a day, or thought to yourself, I need to practice for hours and hours every day to actually get anywhere good? Well, I won't just stop that mentality right now, because I'm going to show you a way in where you don't need to practice a lot, but you just need to be consistent. Now, undoubtedly, if you practice for 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours a day, you're going to make quite a lot of progress, especially if you're keeping it up every day. But if you just practice 7 hours one day every week, you're really not going to get very far. And I think there's one simple reason for this, and it's the consistency you put into your playing. You could practice for 5 minutes every day for a week, and that would be absolutely fantastic for your progress. Work on one little thing each 5 minutes, and over a year you can build up 365 lots of 5-minute sessions, and that's quite a lot of hours when you add it all up. I'm not going to bother to do the maths, but you get the idea. And you can work on these little things, and then you can have 365 little things to your vocabulary, and you can imagine you'll get pretty far. Whereas if you maybe just practice for, let's say, 5 hours once a day every week, then you're going to get 5 lots of 52 weeks, so that's 5 times 52, which will give you 260, I think, and that's 260 hours a year. And while, you know, that's a lot of hours a year, you are going to make some progress, you probably actually won't make as much progress as the 5 minutes a day. And there's a thing about music which I think everyone needs to understand, and luckily a lot of people do understand, and loads of people go with this process and abide by this, and I'm certainly the same. You need a level of self-discipline when it comes to your practice. Practicing every day for no matter how long. If you've got loads of time, you can practice for ages, but if you've only got 10 minutes a day, and I'd say 10 minutes is a really good amount of time, even 15, maybe half an hour if you've got it, ideally half an hour, but 10 minutes is totally fine, and even 5 minutes, as I've given in a previous example. If you've got that self-discipline and that space where you can practice and play for even 5 minutes every day and work on a little thing every day, in a month's time, that's 5 minutes of 30 little things, and you can get a lot done in a time like that, especially when you're dedicated and you're focused to your practice. If you know you've only got 5 minutes of practice in a day, hopefully you're going to be putting quite a lot of time into that. Well, not time, but quite a lot of effort into those 5 minutes and really get something good out of it. And if you're consistent and you self sort of motivating in a way, and you tell yourself you need to practice 5 minutes every day, you need that self level of discipline, and you do that, you'll find you'll get very far. And often it's the best way to do it. Little and often is what I keep saying to people when they say they struggle with practice. If you practice for a little bit every single day, you are going to make so much progress over a year. You can't expect to go from beginner to pro overnight. This is a process which takes quite a lot of time to build and become good at, and there's no way around it, frankly. You just need to put the hours in. But still, if you practice little and often, like 5 minutes a day, you're going to notice a lot of progress over a year, over 2 years, over 5 years, over 10 years. That is a lot of 5-minute daily sessions. Now, some days you just simply won't be able to do it, but don't beat yourself up too much if you can't. But if you really can, and you're at home and you're doing nothing, then just go and practice. Especially with something like the bass, we can really practice at any time of day. Just practice without your amp and just use your ears like that, because the bass is pretty quiet. No one else is going to hear it. You don't have to worry about noise. And just practice the thing which you want to practice over that day. We have the joy to sort of practice whenever we want. If you find yourself in a space where you can practice, you've got an instrument available to you, and you're doing nothing, then do practice as well, because it does fill the time. And while it's good to have moments of nothing, it is good to fill some of that time with practice per se. But if you square away a dedicated amount of time for your practice and like, right, that's the only bit of the day I'm going to do practice, then that's totally fine as well. And you do need that level of self-discipline and consistency, which is going to get you there in terms of your musical progress. Ultimately, you're the one that's sort of got to get all the stuff down. Your teacher can teach you as much as they can teach you. They can teach you the concepts and the ideas and make you understand what you're playing. But ultimately, it's you which still has to put the work in, and doing all of these little sessions is great. Now, I've got perhaps a little bit more time on my hands, and I play for probably about an hour each day, although I'm juggling 3 different instruments at the moment, so I perhaps sort of mix and match. But that's 365 hours a year, and over 3 years that's over 1,000 hours, and over 30 years that's over 10,000 hours of practice. And it adds up quickly. I'm just going to say, if you do 1 hour a day in a week, that's 7 hours of practice. So it goes from 5 minutes to 5 hours or something obscene like that. It's not really obscene. If you have the time, use the time. But you want that self-discipline to practice daily, and don't think to yourself, oh, I need loads and loads of time to practice. If you've got the time, use it. But if time is limited, like I know it is for many people, don't worry about that. Just square away 5-10 minutes each day to practice consistently, and you will keep it up. So please do that. And also, there's one thing which I do want to add about this consistency. Once you're in this mindset, you may feel like when you go out with family or friends on holidays, or you're out somewhere for a few days, you've got to bring an instrument with you to keep practicing. I often find in these situations, you don't really have the right headspace, the right mindset to practice in these scenarios, and usually practice sort of out of the necessity rather than, oh, this is the point every day where I need to practice and I'm going to enjoy this. And you're often like, oh, I need to practice instead of spending time with your family members and things. And you often find you don't get the most productive stuff done with that anyway. So I often find you don't need to bring your instruments if you're going out on a holiday or something like that. Take that as a little break, and then as soon as you get back, get straight back into it. You will notice a little bit of, I'm perhaps a little bit rusty here, but you pretty much feel the same even if you brought your instruments along. And it's another thing which you have to worry about less perhaps when you're out on a holiday or a break. It should be a break after all. But that's it for today's video. I hope that you've enjoyed, and now you realise that I don't need to practice for hours every day to get good. If I practice for a short amount of time and consistently every single day is best. You don't need to do 2 times a day or anything like that. Just once a day, 5-10 minutes, up to an hour, I'd say is a good sort of time frame. 5 minutes to an hour every single day, depending on how much time you have, you're going to make a lot of progress in that year. So please take this on board, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!